So welcome to the studio. We have today Nick, founder and CEO of Synapticon, leading integrated motion, company based in Germany.
I'm very happy to be here.
So what does Synapticon do?
At Synapticon, we're miniaturizing and integrating and digitalizing the component that are needed in robotics and in industrial automation to carry out motion control. And these are usually discrete components from all different kinds of vendors. They have certain size, certain interfaces, certain mechanical properties, and need to be effortfully combined. And we're putting them together in a completely novel type of device that we call the integrated motion device that is much quicker to be integrated at the point of motion, and that brings much greater performance, power density, and features on a software level to the market.
So what is power density?
That's an interesting question, actually. So basically, it's about the amount of electrical power that you ultimately want to put to a motor that moves something in a robot or in a machine that you can basically accommodate within a certain amount of space. So the more power per space unit is higher power density. But I probably need to start explaining that there is some device that is actually powering motors in industry. It's called a servo drive. So these are the electronics that control, but also power electrical motors. The electrical motor is not just powered, from the battery or from the socket. It needs to be a device that conditions the electricity for the motor to move. So most motors in industry are electrically commutated. So you need to design the waveforms, pulse, and do all different kinds of things in order for the motor to move or to position or to apply a certain force as you wish it does. And for this, you need a piece of electronics. And they can have less or higher power density, mean power per size.
Why should I need a servo drive with a higher power density? What applications or what are the benefits of higher power density?
So when you look at the traditional situation in industry, these devices, servo drives, they are as big that they need to be accommodated in electrical cabinets. All of them together with other elements that you need, like inputs and outputs, wiring, power supplies, programmable logic controllers, industrial PCs, and so on. So all this stuff you need for motion control, and that is all these items that usually go to cabinets because they're so big to be accommodated there. And then a lot of wires go from this effortfully engineered and wired cabinet to the point of motion, as we say, so to the axis inside the industrial robot in a factory or to the machine with all different kinds of moving axes. And that's a lot of wiring. That's a lot of cables that combine several hundreds of wires oftentimes, and they need to be effortfully shielded and so on. So it would be much more attractive if you can move as much as possible from this cabinet directly to the point of motion. And for that, it needs to be small. And if these electronics are required to still, move heavy loads very precisely and very dynamically, then they need to be very powerful. So power density allows you to make small devices that can be fit directly at the point of motion, or even be completely hiding inside an electrical motor and do that. And so you avoid a lot of wires between the point of motion and the cabinet, and you avoid many components inside the cabinet as well, simplifying the electrical engineering inside the cabinet and so on. So many reasons why you want to make it small and integrate it there where things are moving and not far away from it.
How did you start Synapticon? Why did you start Synapticon?
Yeah, so actually my co-founders and I, at the time, we were freshly baked engineers of different disciplines, actually. Martin, electrical engineer with focus on chip design. Myself, mostly a mechanical engineer focused on lightweight engineering and onboard systems in the automotive context. So quite some two different areas, so already a little bit interdisciplinary within my own profile. And then Andrea, who was originally a computer scientist, with his first part in the studies actually also being a mechanical engineer, but then having changed to computer science. Our minds were all pretty technical, and we had the ambition to start a technology company that solves a significant problem for a significant number of customers. Robotics was super interesting for us as a future industry. I mean, as an existing industry like 10 years ago, when we started thinking about the company. But now I think it's pretty obvious for everyone, 10 years later, what an interesting industry this is. So, but what we saw back then already is that there was a certain wave in robotic developments at universities. It was when Willow Garage was started in Silicon Valley, coming out of Stanford University, or kind of a private institute next to Stanford University, where the robot operating system, ROS, was born, and causing a certain wave of robotic developments, autonomous mobile robots. And we could see that, in the next couple of years, this is going to be a significant industry, and maybe the next big industry after cars, PCs, mobile phones, and so on. So what's the next big product category enabled by digital technology? And with our technical background, we saw that the systems that are being used to build robots. So first of all, we focused actually on the computing platforms. Only later we came to the motion control equipment that is also, so basically what I say, usually, a robot is a computer with servo drives and sensors attached to it, more or less. So we saw that the components make it difficult to develop robots. So the robotic developers, they spend tons of time just engineering the components and the equipment that they needed to build the actual robot, leaving less time for the design of the actual robot and for the software for the actual robot, for what the robot should actually be and do. And we thought it would be a great enablement for robot designers if they have a platform that they can build their developments on top, which makes their life much simpler and which lets them develop robots on this interdisciplinary level that robotics is much quicker. And that's what we started off with. Not exactly with what we do today. We were not focusing on integrated motion first. We had an embedded systems platform consisting of computing modules and I/O modules and communication modules that you could, combine like a Lego kit, basically, or you could also call it an Arduino on steroids. Arduino for serious applications, so to say, with more compute punch, with more real-time communication capabilities. That was particularly important. We combined this with a special development environment that ran in the cloud. So a cloud-based integrated development environment to use with these electronic modules that shall accelerate the development of any robot compute and distributed control platform system significantly. And that was that was basically the first idea, an enabling platform, an embedded electronics and software platform that accelerates robotics development. That's the idea that we started with, because we had the hope and the ambition that this is going to be a very significant industry. And we, instead of building an own robot, just one type of robot that does something, be it industrial or service robot, we decided it's much more exciting to enable a lot of robotic developers with something. That was the motivation from the beginning and still is today.
What were your first projects?
The very first engagements were actually with two prominent research organizations in southern Germany. One was KUKA Labs, where they built products like the KUKA Aiwa, or the first steps after they bought this out of a German aerospace center, the basic technology, or the KUKA U-Bot. And that was a part of the KUKA R&D organization called KUKA Labs. So very, very open organization working with universities and so on. And the other one was German Aerospace Center in Oberpfaffenhofen, close to Munich as well. So kind of this southern German robotic epicenter, if you will. Where, by the way, the lightweight and sensitive robot was invented like 10 years before we started our business by someone who's also today a Synapticon customer building sensitive robotic technology. So the interactions with these two groups, and then later on followed, so if we'd ask, hey, who were the next, basically, that was a couple of startups in Silicon Valley then around Willow Garage that we also used as early adopters, some groups at Stanford University as well. So all pretty in the robotics research domain, but these were great sparring partners, great early adopters for what we were doing, because they developed the bleeding edge of robotics, and the requirements that they had back then were probably the requirements, and that was our logic at least, that any robot manufacturer of volume products will have in 5 to 10 years from back then, which turned out to be true. And yeah, so that's basically the first couple of folks that we worked with.
So Synapticon is known in most companies around the globe that are working on robotics right now. What was the turning point, or when was it you found that problem that you solved with a product that really made a change to make you grow like you are now?
Yeah. So actually, we had a significant pivot right at half of the company's history looked at from today. So we started with this platform, and as I said, we were working with researchers mostly. So that is exciting, and it's good to sharpen the product and to develop the fundamental technology. But they are not good customers to have when you want to build a scaling business, because they're doing exciting stuff. They're probably paying good prices for the products, but they don't need so many products. So it's not a volume business when working with research only. And it was clear from the beginning that our actual customers are industrial companies that really build products in volume. And whenever we worked with these, we didn't find researchers who went down to all different kinds of levels of the technology stack and were able to craft software from scratch, use our modules, use our SDK, and all kind of challenges that you have when you're just using an embedded platform and you're basically building your system by yourself. But engineers that were focused on the actual product development, and they needed some stuff that kind of either worked off the shelf or they needed to have a partner to develop it for them. So they were not the R&D engineers that would build on the foundation of what we provided. So it turned out it was pretty research folk oriented. And when we worked with industrial companies, then we ended up usually doing engineering projects. So 2 to 3 years later, we found ourselves in a crazy situation where we were developing all different kinds of full stack products, so sometimes partial technology stacks, but sometimes full stack products like industrial robots from the white sheet of paper to a sellable volume product, so including mechanics, electronics, software, everything. Autonomous lawnmowers that were, taking away the wire boundary that you usually need to put into your garden. So using state-of-the-art navigation technology for robotics in a consumer robot product. So we were basically crunching down a 20K euro technology stack to $200 that this consumer product allowed to have. We did electric bikes, we did electric scooters, we did ticket vending machines, we did smart connectors for condition monitoring and predictive maintenance for machines. We did some collaborative robots, we did some just partial electronics for service robots, software stacks to control fleets of robots and rent them out and so on with smart app integration. So it was a super diverse engagement. So our customers were all over the place, from super industrial to pretty consumer product focused. And these are already two different worlds, very different worlds. And the topics were super diverse, as you realize when I go through the examples. It's a very different thing to develop some motion control electronics or some condition monitoring electronics or the software that navigates a consumer product through a garden, which hasn't been done before that. So these were exciting times for as engineers in terms of the stuff that we were dealing with. It was super diverse. It was super exciting projects, and we were quite successful in acquiring them. So we had customers reaching from Silicon Valley all over Europe to Korea, including China. So really, we're super successful acquiring these projects. But we ended up in a really wild place doing so with tons of these projects and with nearly no time anymore to develop our own products. We realized how we crafted the product platform made us end up in engineering services naturally. So it was not yet as ready to be used, was not yet as enabling as we aimed it to be. And also the company was financed based on these projects. So we were bootstrapping ourselves. and that led to this kind of circumstance as well, that we needed to do the project to keep the company running and growing, and then had a hard time affording the resources to develop the products, or at least couldn't get enough people as quickly enough to be able to do so. And so we decided to strongly focus the company. That was during 2017, basically. We thought about, okay, what assets do we have here in terms of product, and what do we need to do with these assets to really make a scalable standard product out of that, that we don't need to re-engineer or effortfully integrate into our customers' products, or where no tons of strings need to be attached of peripheral software or software on top of our components. So where we are simply, basically, how can we compress and grind a diamond that everybody needs for their products, and this ended up being for us the best choice was to focus in industrial applications only. So we basically omitted consumer applications from then, and we said this was based on the assets that we had at the point. We decided to focus on motion control only, and to solve these motion control challenges that our customers had across the spectrum within the industrial focus as good as possible.
Why did you decide to focus on motion control for industrial applications?
We saw, this was basically, as I said, analyzing our assets and matching it with customer requirements, and see where is the strongest need for what we were able to do particularly well.
What was this big pain or this big challenge that these developers in the industrial world, motion control, were facing, that you saw that you could help them?
Yeah, it's actually a combination of pressure in terms of development time, then constrained resources when it comes to the development of their systems, as they need to develop complete robots. And at the same time, then not only in the end for the volume product cost constraints, but for sure these as well. You have them in industrial applications similarly to consumer products, but slightly different, but still they are there. But besides that, a big demand for high performance, high quality, and high reliability. So we clearly recognized our capabilities to create technology that serves the highest needs in terms of performance, quality, and reliability, at the same time that we can help the customers to make their engineering processes and engineering efforts leaner and smaller. And so the best match was in industrial applications, where the demand for performance, quality, and reliability is high. And at the same time, we can help the customers best with shortening the time to market and development time, because this is where the development times are much more constrained than in a consumer product. Even if it sounds a little bit paradox, but you have more time optimizing a consumer product, as it will be manufactured in much greater volume than you have for an industrial product. Really, it's not only accelerating development time, it's not only making it economic in the end, it's not only putting features inside, it's about doing all this at the same time that you correspond to the highest needs in terms of performance and quality and reliability. That's what industrial applications need.
Why motion control is such a challenge in developments in this world?
Now staying within robotics, as I said, a robot is basically a computer that has motors and sensors attached. And the difference between a computer and a robot is that it can move through the environment, and that it can, as we say, manipulate the environment. And therefore it needs motion control equipment to do so. It needs motors, gearboxes often attached to that, and all these electronics that Synapticon is taking care of. So when serving or aiming to serve the robotics industry, and then in an extension, today we're not only serving the robotics industry, but in a wider sense, the whole automation. So if you will, more complex robots. it becomes pretty quickly obvious that motion control is, besides the software that determines the robots and machines functionality and features, the most important discipline actually to make robots work and work well.
Robotics and industrial automation applications that are being developed during the last 30, 40 years, how they were solving this motion challenge until now?
So quite traditional equipment was being used. As I explained in the beginning, what integrated motion is and what you usually have with the cabinets and so on, all these components. But how did they come to place? Why was this good enough, so to say, so far? I think the only explanation for that is the historic development of this equipment and the technology. So basically, the fundamental problem that you have in industry when you want to move motors, so you've got that motor, it's an electric motor, either commutated by mechanics or brush, you just need to connect plus and minus DC, or it's electrically commutated. So you have 3 phases that you need to electronically control and dimension the power that goes in order to move it as you want, and you then have much more control capabilities based on that. And on the other hand side, you've got a power source. So be it a socket and the grid, or basically the grid with different voltages, usually AC, or batteries. But the traditional situation is you've got a grid voltage and you've got that motor, and now you need something in between to make that energy move that motor in a desired way. And this is really how servo drives, this main component of motion control, were developed today and by whom they've been developed. They were built by electrical engineers that solved that particular problem. They created a box that converted this grid electricity, or this energy coming from the grid, to a form of energy that moved the motor in the desired way and controlled it. And that is also how far the product category was thought through. And then you had this box that did that, and this box needed to be put somewhere, and you put it to the cabinet. And then you wired it up with everything else, and that's it. And then an industry developed for all this equipment, and everyone was doing it more or less the same way, built different kinds of boxes with different features, some smaller, some bigger. But it was, basically, in industry and in automation, the solutions are being crafted for each individual automation problem in the factory. So usually it's about manufacturing automation. Well, there is also process automation and stuff, but the key area is manufacturing automation, and each type of manufacturing automation, every manufacturing factory is built differently, and very individual solutions need to be developed for that. And the simplest way to address that is to come up with a bunch of very universal products that you can use for all different kinds of problems. But they then tend to be, not optimized for given problems. And when we come to robotics, these machines, they become series products and volume products. And if you build motion equipment that is now, particularly designed and intended to be used in these more and more different kinds of robots that are being developed, then you end up with completely different requirements, and then also different answers to how this motion control equipment should look like. Your main problem is not anymore to convert the energy from the grid to the motor. Your main problem is to design that product, this robotic product. Even just the industrial robot arm, which sometimes, is also just a machine that connects components similar to a more complex machine. But when robots evolve, they become more and more integrated, more and more complex, and there are more and more products, like a car is a product that really needs to be engineered and designed. And then, you suddenly have completely different problems, which are mostly integration problems and product design problems, and not just this issue that you need to somehow convert the electricity to move your motors. And that's exactly how we approached actually the problem. We were not these electrical engineers that got asked by the customer to create a box that does that. But we're product designers. Our background was more in product design and in robotics development. And yeah, so we knew and we experienced these integration problems firsthand and approached motion control from this perspective. And that is probably what made us end up with completely different answers to the same problem than what was standard in industry so far.
So in the cabinet area, also communications were centralized. Now that we're moving the drives, control sensors outside of a cabinet, how we are resolving these communications and what are the trends now?
Yeah. And I mean, there you're mentioning an important other trend besides just more productization of automation equipment and robotics that I mentioned, which is generally also in the general automation equipment, the decentralization, which brings benefits for the engineering of the machines. So why is it interesting to decentralize? Because you can avoid this effortful cabinet engineering. You have more universally applicable components that are more flexible. When you have a machine platform or different machine configurations, or you want to evolve your machine design, it's much easier to do this with decentralized components than when you always have a dedicated centralized cabinet to be engineered for a particular version of a machine. So with each version of the machine, you have to engineer another type of cabinet that serves that. When they're distributed, the components, this becomes much easier, and you can forget widely about this cabinet, or you can standardize the cabinet basically with the power supplies and stuff like this. And so this is basically why it's desirable to integrate also motion control equipment outside of the robotics application.
Many applications, especially related to motion control, were running with CAN open in the past for communications, but looks like there is a trend towards EtherCAT in high performance applications. Why that, and how is that helping in making those machines?
Yeah, so this is now an interesting point actually, because you mentioned CAN bus and EtherCAT, and you asked about the communication interfaces before. One hand side, you need the high-speed interfaces and the real-time critical or the real-time suitable interfaces like EtherCAT for coordinated motion of several axes. And that's a problem that cannot be sensibly decentralized. So you have a hard time, or the system architecture doesn't make so much sense when you try to decentralize highly synchronous axis motion control. It can make sense for simpler applications where each axis is kind of independently moving, or at least doesn't need to be hypersynchronous, and then you don't need to have these types of interfaces. So how to say, the decentralization in a way triggers, or the decentralization of the drives in a way also triggers the decentralization of the motion controller, the multi-axis motion controller. But for highly synchronous motion, it doesn't make so much sense, and you still have a motion controller, which is in a way centralized, at least for a bunch of axes, like for example in a robot controller. That just, in terms of the hardware, how should I explain? It doesn't make any sense to have a motion controller that is fully fledged, capable of doing any type of motion control in each of the drives. Even that the hardware is becoming more and more compact and lightweight, it still doesn't make sense to waste the compute power to be integrated in each of the drives that it could run the whole, kinematics and multi-axis motion control. So to avoid the high bandwidth and real-time communication, which is always more energy intensive and also more more expensive ultimately than a simple communication like CAN bus, for example, where you have less real-time criticality, or less real-time capabilities and less bandwidth, which are from this standpoint more suitable for these, or basically would be attractive for decentral installations. But again, decentralizing drives makes a lot of sense. Decentralizing motion control or real-time motion control doesn't make so much sense. But of course, we should talk at some point about interoperability and the different kinds of field buses. It's not only EtherCAT and not only CAN bus, that you've got all different kinds of field buses, and that there is a unification now also taking place with OPC UA and so on.
What has been the evolution of the motion control solutions in the market, and how companies solve this challenge?
Yeah, so when looking at the communication technologies being used in motion control applications, you can basically distinguish or kind of outline three eras in a way. So in the early beginnings, things changed from analog control to some kind of communication interface. So instead of just basically turning a button with a resistor behind to send a certain analog value to a drive, when you want to automate, that's a bad idea, because you need to generate these analog values, so to say, from a computer, and that doesn't fit. So you rather would want to tell the drive in a digital way what to do. And then in the first period, I think several tried to establish standards, but also many did custom development simply, especially now when, looking at the beginnings or at our experience at Synapticon. As I said, we were working with German Aerospace Center, for example. This might be a quite exotic example and a little bit off industry, because that's, space and research, but they had extremely high requirements in terms of real-time capabilities and bandwidth. What they did is they built their own high-speed real-time communication interface based on, I think it was PCI Express, that they implemented with FPGAs. They called this SpaceWire, and it was super performing, but also super effortful and super proprietary, of course. But they had their own island, their own world of devices, and they developed all of them themselves, and they needed to maintain them as well, all these devices and the system, with a certain effort in industry, where when you're running a factory, you don't have the time to spend on developing these drives in your own proprietary communication protocols. It might have happened in the other domain, but it's then usually automation platform vendors that took this business and tried to establish, and they were successful in establishing proprietary standards, several of them. CAN bus, more coming from the automotive context, but then also being used in automation and industry, based on the Profi bus history. So you always had the non-Ethernet standards, but just based on some, basically like a bell wire, if you will. And then at some point, Ethernet was adopted, and all different kinds of industrial Ethernets were defined. In the CAN world, you could basically see the start of EtherCAT, of PowerLink, and a few other standards that adopted the CAN Open specification on Ethernet. And then the kind of the big two players based on Profibus one hand side, Profinet on the other hand side, DeviceNet being the foundation for Ethernet IP, so Siemens and Rockwell world, so to say. And Bosch had Circus 3, for example, a particularly powerful motion control interface, together with EtherCAT, the two standards that then made it into this high-speed, highly synchronous motion control. So, and ultimately rendering a world which is now a reality in industry, and also then as a subset robotics, where you have all these standards. And they're standards, and they have compatibility like the CAN bus protocol-based industrial Ethernets. But on the other hand side, they're proprietary. It's similar to a situation, just imagine an internet in which you actually have a Google internet, an IBM internet, and then a Facebook internet, and so on. So all of them, you need to choose, basically. Are you subscribing to the Google internet, or are you subscribing to the IBM internet? Wouldn't be the same, right? Probably not the same world would have developed like it did. But in industry, we have this situation. And now the third evolution, of the third era, is actually where, based on customer demand mostly, automation players, automation platform vendors are trying to get more interoperable based on technologies like OPC UA, MQTT, DDS, so service-oriented architectures that run on standard Ethernet or future standard Ethernet. So this is kind of the third era. So again, first proprietary, then some standards which are again within their worlds proprietary, and now unified, which is not yet secure that it will really evolve and we will have a unified standard going forward. Let's hope, but there are some interests in industry that prevent that actually.
What communication buses is Synapticon supporting and why?
So in the robotics context, CAN bus and EtherCAT are super well established. So fortunately, both in industrial robotics, but also in service robotics, so going out of industrial applications, with very few exceptions, these two standards are being used. CAN bus for the less performance critical applications, EtherCAT whenever it's about highly synchronous and dynamic motion. And this is comparably easy to deal with because basically everybody uses these standards. So just two standards to support. And also going out of robotics in some industrial applications, also pretty established. But when you look at the whole of industry, then you have this more diversified situation where every factory runs on a different field bus. So at Synapticon, we started with serving robotics manufacturers, and therefore we from the beginning actually started with the more performance relevant bus EtherCAT. We were kind of born EtherCAT, our very first modules for that, and then we added CAN bus as some kind of low spec and legacy support, unlike most other companies who made this kind of the steps in a different direction. Probably because of the time when we started. EtherCAT was already clear to be relevant. But now as we're moving beyond robotics into the general motion control industry, so where it's about automating machines, we have to and we will support all the relevant field buses. So beyond EtherCAT, this is Ethernet IP, it is Profinet, and it will be OPC UA. So basically to cover at least 90% of the world in terms of the industrial field buses.
How much wiring are we reducing when using integrated motion?
Tons of them actually. So you need to see what is left when you have integrated drives. There are basically two wires or two wire bundles left, which is the supply voltage or the DC bus. So this is literally a plus and a minus wire. And then the communication line. And this can be as simple as a two-wire CAN bus or a single pair Ethernet, so two wires again. So you can boil it down to 4 wires. 2 power supply, 2 communication, and then it's daisy chained from axis to axis. Now, when you look at the traditional situation with the cabinets with the drives in the cabinet, that's quite a bit more because you now have 1 wire for each motor phase going between the servo drive and the cabinet and the motor. So that's already 3 power instead of 2. Then they need to be shielded usually. The DC bus rarely needs to be shielded, but these motor phases need to be shielded because otherwise they would be disturbing. It would be an EMC nightmare. Then you have the encoder wires going from the motor to the servo drive. Encoder is the sensor that measures the position and the speed inside of the motor. And an encoder interface can be from 2 to 10 wires, depending on which one it is. And again, that's another cable. And often you need an individual one for each axis because encoder interfaces are usually not daisy chainable. Some of them are, but not all of them are. Then you have additional wires for the IOs, for additional switches and signals, and most importantly for the safety signals. So for basically a safe torque off and safe brake control for the brake control itself. So usually the brakes inside the motors are controlled also by some IO in the cabinet. Rarely the servo drive itself, and this requires for additional wires. And so for a robotic arm like a 6-axis arm, you easily end up with 200 wires in your cable, combining all of these. These are expensive cables because they need to be shielded. Otherwise, you have a lot of signal interference on them and so on. And this is all eliminated, with decentralized integrated motion. integrating the motion control components basically means going from 200 wires that you typically have for a 6-axis robot arm to just 4. What we're integrating are up to 7 devices actually into one. So, and we call the result the integrated motion device. So we're taking the servo drive, we're taking the motor feedback. This is essentially a position and speed sensor. Then the axis encoder. In the context of robotics, you not only want to measure the motor position, but also the position on the output, where you have usually a gear in between, and therefore some mechanical backlash and non-linearity and transmission errors and so on. So it's 2 different positions. Then the brake, which is holding the axis when it's powered off. So you don't want the robot to basically fall down when you switch it off or you stop it. It should be held without the motors being active. That's what the brake is there for. Then high-speed IOs for all different kinds of applications, analog, digital IOs, which are usually a discrete device. The brake control is often a separate device. We're not even counting this among the devices. Then the safety, which is kind of the safe monitor. So beyond just this safely disengaging the motor, which is called STO, safe torque off, and the safe brake control in order to engage the brake safely. What comes to that is the safe monitoring of the speed, the position, and the force. And that's usually done by a safety PLC with safety encoders. So usually you have another encoder attached to the basic motor encoder that is just there for the safety surveillance. And that is also integrated. And last but not least, always a ready-made solution for the mechanical and thermal integration of the device. So customers don't need to deal with thinking about, okay, how to mechanically integrate it, how to thermally integrate it. This is solved by the device itself. So if you mount it as instructed, then you'll be fine, for the performance which is specified. So yeah, this whole bunch of devices or integration aspects goes into one standardized device. That's the integrated motion device.
Okay. What products do you have in this range of integrated motion devices?
We have one product line which is focused on the needs of robots, with a particular focus on lightweight robots, collaborative robots, and smart actuators, which are basically single-axis robots, or basically modules that you can use to build whatever kind of robot, or you can use it for auxiliary access in machines. So these are products that are circular in shape. That's the name Summon and Circulo, respectively as well, and that have a hollow shaft. So robot axes are usually characterized by the fact that they have a maximum diameter of hollow shafts, so you can route through the cables, even that you need less now. But traditionally, you want to route through a lot, like also including media, like pneumatic lines and so on. So you better have more space in the middle of your robot axis than none or less. It's an integration device, so it's designed to be then inside another housing. So it's not IP protected or whatever. So it's supposed to be hidden within the robot arm or on the back of the smart actuator that is supposed to go into whatever other housing. And besides this, we have a generic series of servo drives, but this we don't refer to as integrated motion device. That's the Summon Node series, which is a generic, universally usable servo drive that goes to AGV applications, to lab automation applications, semiconductor and stuff like this, wherever it's decentralized. So the difference of this product line compared to what you otherwise find on the market is still, even that it's just a generic servo drive, equipment for the decentral integration. So like a thermal mechanical interface, EMC qualification, and so on, all being done. So it simplifies integration, but it's not for a particular application like the Circulo series in the robotics context. And what we're just launching, new product line, goes into the GMC market. So not being focused on robots means the robot arms and AGVs that some of these hollow shaft drives that I mentioned before is also being used for, but for machinery application.
Before Circulo, how were companies solving motion control on each axis?
And there are two possibilities that they had. So one was to use discrete components, the few embeddable ones which are on the market. So not the cabinet-based drives, but small servo drives, little rectangular PCB stacks that you can buy from different kinds of vendors. Discrete encoders, embeddable encoders, or being it encoders that are originally supposed to be put into servo motors, and discrete brakes. So three main components, if you will, that would they would do the job in some way, but they're usually big, not optimized for the integration, and it's several devices with several interfaces, separate integration issues, and so on. Option B was that you start from scratch designing on electronics that either implement these discrete components, not off the shelf, but maybe more optimized for your particular application. So many examples would see separate servo drives in a particular shape for a particular application, so nicer to be integrated. And then usually separate encoders, which might be optimized or not optimized. In very rare cases, some encoders integrated into the same electronics that are also used for the drives. But that was a very recent development among the custom in-house developments. And for the brake, so far, no option really to do a custom development. You would have always bought a component from someone. Without integrating it, it doesn't make so much sense to develop one from scratch on your own. In some, either buy off-the-shelf components, several of them from different vendors, or start from scratch developing own electronics with everything related to that. Building up an engineering team, maintaining these electronics, manufacturing these electronics, maintaining the supply chain, and so on and so forth.
How much does it take to make a servo drive from scratch?
We first need to define servo drive. This is a big spectrum that this term can cover. So to turn a motor, it doesn't take so much. You can go out and get a chip from a microcontroller manufacturer and basically use their software library to somehow use their reference design and their software library to somehow put together something that turns a motor. But the more you get towards, the real control challenges that you have when doing a robot, and an industrial robot in particular, where it's about dynamics, in the end, the power output, the efficiency, all the EMC aspects, you get into all different kinds of troubles. And when it comes to features, and this is what I meant with it's simple to turn a motor, but it's not simple to realize high-performance motion control. That's usually a software topic and a hardware maturity question. So to mature hardware just takes it takes time. So technology is one, and technical excellence is one thing, but maturity usually takes time. It takes revisions, so to say, and to go through hardware revisions takes at least like 3 months to 6 months per revision. And you probably don't do something that you can call an industrial grade motor controller with less than 3 revisions. And then you have your first generation, basically, that suffices the first set of requirements. And then on the software level, that is an even, a more intensive story, because besides just controlling the basic motor that it turns and controlling speed and controlling the position, on top of that, cascading control loops, there is a huge stack of features that are required, either in the robotics context, but especially also in the industrial context. And to build up all these features, this is nothing that the motor control provider does for you with the libraries that they provide. So this literally takes years until you at all understand the problems and what it means for your product, and then to implement these features, what your customers or your own system actually needs.
I've seen tutorials from a very famous chip manufacturer where you can make a motor position control with EtherCAD in 5 minutes with their development kit. How far is that from reality?
I mean, with this development kit, and with the prepared demo, it's probably true. Yeah, if you use the motor that they provide and the sensor and so on. So if you use this system, I believe that's possible because it's prepared. Now, when you ever used an embeddable or kind of whatever kind of servo drive with an unknown encoder and an unknown motor, so it's even already developed servo drive, a full-fledged industrial servo drive from different kinds of vendors that provide mature products, and you try to make it run with a new type of motor and a new type of encoder. You might have ended up needing many hours and even days to make it work properly. So just to bring up a combination of a servo drive, a motor, and an encoder already can take much longer. Now, if you develop the drive by yourself to get the hardware and software straight, and to make it run will take you a lot longer than that for sure.
And this is only for a prototype. What happens in series? Are all motors the same? Are all assemblies the same?
This is the typical the dark side of the Pareto principle that hits you there. So such a prototype is comparably easy to be put together, especially if you're copying the reference design that the chip manufacturer gives you, or you have someone that you hire who did something before and kind of takes the circuitry that he or she did before and then re-implements it. So the prototype is there quite quickly, but then this prototype needs to be put to application, and there is a maturing process within the product that is being used for. And then these electronics have only usually, when you do it in-house as a robot manufacturer, for example, then they only have your robot as a maturing platform. So they're only exposed to the application and the use that your currently developed robot provides. So it's not a ready-made robot that you can retrofit it in and then try out everything. No, basically the electronics need to be developed alongside the application, and the application is being developed still. So it gives a very rare opportunity for this prototype to mature in terms of features, functionality, and so on. So this is kind of fighting each other already: the development of the target product, where it needs to be integrated, and the development of the electronics. You should be done with either of both. You should have a ready-made a piece of electronics to control the motors, which is perfect, or you should have a perfect robot to mature either side. But that is usually not the case because you're developing both from scratch. And then when it comes to the mass production, that's then kind of the end game, because it's a completely different thing to produce the electronics for a bunch of prototypes, and then to have a mass production of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of devices that need to where you need to ensure quality, where you need to ensure longevity of the design, component availability. You need to make sure that not 30% of what you produce is crap, but more like 95% of what you produce is good. So you need to develop a test system on a hardware as well as on a software level, and that is something folks who start developing on motor controllers are not aware of usually in this moment. It is something, it's these 20% that take up 80% of the time, but the efforts coming there are usually ignored in the very beginning when the decision is being made to develop components in-house.
If I was designing a new robot or a new industrial application, what would be the 3 key things that I should have to choose a provider for servo drives or for integrated motion devices?
Maybe before going on that level, as a robot manufacturer, you need to ask yourself, what is the actual value I'm bringing to my customers? Basically, not sure if I'm taking the question too far apart, but I think this is super important to mention. What drives the value for a customer who buys a robot? Is it the features it provides? Probably yes. Is it the usability, how easy it is to be programmed? Probably yes. Is it how well it's suitable for a given application? How much it saves the customer time to use that robot for a given application, or even comes with a complete application kit or a complete application unit? How much of when I'm talking about features, AI-based automation is included. So all these things that really simplify the life and increase the use for the robot user, these are the factors that drive value for your robotic product, for sure. Is it the electronics inside of the robot arm? Does your customer stand up in the morning and say, I'm going to buy brand XY because they've got such beautifully in-house crafted electronics, for example? Or because they buy the electronics from this and this place? No. So the customer is usually not interested on this level. What is important about these components? They need to provide the performance you need. They need to provide the quality you need. You don't want to get into trouble in volume production. And they need to provide the reliability also in operation. So they're very foundational for the performance and the value that your customer that your product creates for the customer. So very essential, but they're not value creating itself. So they're the foundation, and you need to have a solid foundation. And you need to ask yourself, if you do all this yourself, are you mitigating or increasing the risk that something goes wrong there? These electronics and the software used within these components, they matured in the context of your product. They matured in your volume for your robot, which will be very little in the beginning, hopefully more in the future. Versus when you buy a component from a specialized vendor that implements that, then this is matured in many, many different kinds of robots. It has been produced in a much greater volume already at the point when you're using it. This manufacturer is solely focused on this component, that it provides great performance, that it's super reliable, that it's got high quality, because that's what their business depends on. So the probability that you have a much more reliable foundation for your product is given when you buy it from a specialized vendor. So, and I mentioned a couple of items that you originally asked for, what is important. We can go deeper on this, of course, and say, look, it shouldn't be only performing, reliable, and a good quality, and from a trustworthy partner. Of course, you should be concerned about what overhead the use of this component creates in your engineering organization. How many people do you need to deal with that? It's a ready-made component. It's an off-the-shelf component. Okay, so you made the step from in-house development to a component. But what does it take to integrate that component? How easy is it, and how flexible is it in terms of the integration and the use for your product? And something that also hits in late is aspects like certain pre-certifications for later end certifications of the whole product. In safety, this is comparably overlookable because it simply stacks up. So if you have a certified component, it makes your life much easier when it's when for the product to be certified on a higher level. For EMC, it's slightly different. So electromagnetic compliance, it's a very foundational electronic qualification that every product needs to have. And here the component vendors, they often qualify and certify with, how to say, very artificial boundary conditions. So if you put this to a lab and you shield the wires and you put a housing around and whatever, and then it's fine, then it's qualified. But when integrated into your product, the situation is a lot different. So something that you should particularly look into and probably ask the manufacturer, how well is this really tested in terms of EMC in all different kinds of environments? Did you somehow pass the lab with your kind of, just with a setup that somehow worked? Or is this robust? Is it basically, will it simplify my life in terms of EMC? Also in my situation, so what can I expect here to happen? Because the reality is most of the components that you can buy, they're not prepared and thought through for integration in all different kinds of environments. They are not made robust in this aspect. They're often causing big pain and headache when it comes to EMC qualification. That's kind of a hidden secret of servo drive components that you can buy. And the same goes for the thermal integration. So few servo drive vendors are offering components that are basically integratable and embeddable actually have prepared products and help you with mechanical and thermal integration. And the thermal integration can be extremely performance limiting or constraining. Therefore, besides the features, the certification and robust certification or certification conditions, you should basically ask for the integration support and how well this thing is thought through and documented, and how much the manufacturer will help you in properly integrating it to really reach the performance that the spec sheet tells.
EMC and EMI can be a big problem. What is the single biggest source of EMI in a setup like this?
If there would be a single thing that you can point people at and take care of that, then it would be easy to control. So essentially, avoiding cables means avoid sources of interference and disturbance. So both sides basically being disturbed and disturbing other parts of the system, because wires is usually where EMI happens. And this is because cables are effectively antennas that radiate certain disturbances, or they can receive them and then disturb the electronics attached to them. Integrated motion means to avoid cables within the components. Most obvious example, motor and drive. When there is not a long wire between the motor and the drive, then you naturally have less issues with the interference on that. If they're close together, or ideally, literally soldered together, then it's a whole different world. So this is, a very obvious fundamental step to reduce EMC trouble, but still in these electronics that you can integrate close to the motor, and where you have nearby components. So the traditional situation, when you try to integrate conventional components at the point of motion, still here you've often got EMC nightmares, and the consolidation into a single device greatly helps. In the end, it's also a question of how well the product was executed by the manufacturer. The manufacturer doesn't necessarily care so much, because he can rely on that you can shield stuff, you can add ferrites, you can add housings and stuff, or they can put a lot of efforts into engineering the product well, so that you don't need to do all these things. So it's also a question on how strong is the intention of the component vendor to help you.
If you have the drive on the cabinet, you can have huge air cooling or liquid cooling if you want.
Yeah.
You can dissipate almost all the power you want. If you have it on top of the motor, will that mean that you will have to derate the motor? Will you have to reduce the power?
Exactly. So this is the main challenge, if you want, of integrated motion, of integrating these motion components at the motor. Size is one, but size is related to thermal aspects as well. So in order to make things small, you need to optimize the thermal dissipation and the thermal engineering. And then, as you correctly say, when you connect the drive electronics, power electronics that have electrical losses, so they generate heat, and the same is for the motor. The motor is unfortunately not an ideal machine and also has losses. So the motor heats up to 140, 150 degrees in full operation. So that's the maximum temperature servo motors can have. And the drive electronics heat up as well. And usually they're not able to stand these high temperatures that the motor can stand. So there even has more constrained limitations in terms of thermal. If you put them both together, you have the issue that they're both heating each other up, and you cannot cool things actively like you just mentioned in the cabinet, like with active ventilation or even liquid cooling. No way to do this when it's at the point of motion, because you don't want to have fans there. They would add size. They would not make it IP60X compliant anymore, and you don't want to have liquid cooling all through your machine. So it needs to be passively cooled. And yes, effectively, the axes traditionally need to be derated.
And how do you solve this problem then?
That's, if you will, coming down to one of our core technology, which is about avoiding switching losses in the drive, and which is avoiding just electrical losses in the motor that can happen based on imperfections in how the power is put into the motor, for example. But first, how does a servo drive lose power to heat? Every time it switches. So servo drives are digital devices. So they, in order to dimension or dose the electricity, they're switching at a higher frequency, pulse length, and so on. And in order to basically to control to a certain sort of fundamental control loop is the current control loop. So in order to control to a certain current target, you have to switch, measure, switch, measure, switch, measure several times, and then you manage to arrive at the control target. Because each time you switch, you can push it into one direction. So this is how a control loop works. And each time you switch, you have losses that generate heat. Especially when you want to control fast, it means you need to switch fast and oftentimes. So especially in a robotics context where you sometimes want to have control bandwidth going up to like 80 kilohertz or something like that of control loop speed in order to reach a certain control bandwidth. You need to respectively switch fast with a traditional drive. And Synapticon technology, we call this technology the model predictive deadbeat field-oriented control. That's a special approach with which we basically avoid the traditional PID control approach, where you need to try and error, and then at some point you're at the desired target. We have a model of the basically the power source and the wiring, so the DC bus, the power electronics, the motor, the reduction, and the load attached. So basically, it's a mathematical model of the whole drivetrain, if you will, and the electronics. And this is parameterized during the commissioning time based on all different kinds of measurements. So we have a parameterized model of the whole drivetrain, and that allows us to, instead of controlling to a target, directly set the target, so to say. So within one switching cycle, we can reach the current control target. And this avoids switching cycles. So we're directly at the target in one switch instead of in 5 to 10 switches, respectively avoiding power losses. And that's all on a software level. So in addition to that, it's kind of electronics craftsmanship to make sure that thermal dissipation is optimal. Then up to the mechanical integration of the device, that this heat that you still generate goes away quickly, and that basically also your electronics, they can deal with certain temperatures. That's another aspect. When the motor is hot, you still need to be able to cool through the hot motor, for example. So these are different ingredients that lead to our capability to do that. And that is the same for the power density, by the way. This is unique technology that's patented as well.
Many companies are using different transistor technology to achieve higher power density. New technologies that are appearing.
Yeah.
How are you solving?
Actually, with traditional MOSFET technology, latest generation, but we investigated and did a lot of pre-development of GaNFETs, so gallium nitride based power MOSFETs, which is one type of this new generation of power ICs that you mentioned, that ideally should make things more efficient. And in the context of servo drives, GaNFETs, they allow you to basically make things more efficient on the drive itself, but it entails to increase the switching frequencies a lot. So you wouldn't do it. I mean, I mentioned the model predictive deadbeat approach before. So we can reach the control bandwidth and the motion performance of a traditional servo drive being switched at 60 to 80 kilohertz at 16 kilohertz of switching frequency with respectively lower switching losses. And with gun FETs, you ideally should switch at above 100 kilohertz, 200 kilohertz, for example. And on the drive itself, this might be manageable, even that the control loops are becoming problematic and the rest of the circuitry creates issues. You have, in addition to that, to deal with all the stuff that is happening on the DC bus. And it is often ignored. So a gun FET-based servo drive might be interesting on the device level itself, but it causes a lot of trouble on the DC bus traditionally. So on a whole system level, your EMC issues again become critical, and they, among other factors, mean that electricity energy is burned in capacitors that you need, in coils that you need, and stuff like this on a bus level, which is why we decided that even for our next generation product, a multi-channel MOSFET architecture with traditional silicon MOSFETs is much more economic and on a whole system level even more efficient than a gun FET-based system. So we see the technology being more suitable for applications in slower systems, like in chargers or in power generation. Also, when you are doing traction drives for vehicles, for example, for cars, this is where the technology makes sense. But in the context of motion control equipment, especially low voltage motion control equipment, we identified that silicon MOSFET technology is the best solution.
Where do you see the future of robotics and industrial automation in the coming years?
So what we see is much more mobile systems coming to factories and logistics centers, AGVs and AMRs, so automatic guided vehicles, autonomous mobile robots in the industrial context. And then in the commercial context, more and more service robots that are performing all different kinds of tasks of everyday life in a business environment or in a private environment. Just more and more product categories are coming up, and we will see a lot of different robots in the service robotics context. First on wheels, and then in perspective on legs, talking about humanoids. So what we see with the recent introduction of all different kinds of companies that joined the humanoid game, in a way following the basically Tesla announcement to be active in the area, and Elon Musk's basically explanations why it might be a good idea to work on the category. We see a lot of players joining that, and we think this time it will be a sustainable development. So we see so many companies starting to develop humanoid robots. So you could say a truly universal service robot, that can be used for all different kinds of applications, that is not limited to any environmental constraints, because it's legged and it's it can manipulate whatever if the software allows for it. We think this hardware development, so most of the companies are pretty hardware focused these days, that this is sustainable, because we already see critical steps being reached, especially in the East. So companies coming out of China who presented already extremely economic designs that might be bring this reality of affordable humanoids closer much quicker than we expected originally. On the other hand side, it's all about software. So the recent evolution steps, really need to say, in AI, chatbots first and foremost, but basically the same technology that generative AI in text can be used for intelligent behavior of machines, understanding images or moving camera data and then behaving in a way. It's exactly the same way like the chatbot behaves and gives you smart answers, which are super surprising. So this is completely applicable to the world of robotics. And that brings the other ingredient which is necessary for humanoids to really become a reality of everyday life. That means mass products. Besides the hardware, is the software. So a generally intelligent software that at least allows to cover a set of applications. So for this device or this machine, this robot to be suitable for a set of tasks that have not been addressable with other robotic systems and other software. So long story short, this hype wave in humanoid hardware, we believe will be sustainable, and the world of AI is ready to cater this category of products as well. So to make sensible products feasible.
Months ago, no one was talking about chatbots and AI in that field. I've been working in marketing, so I've tried many versions before that, and they were not anything good. There was an inflection point some months ago that changed everything, and now AI is really something you can work with. What is stopping humanoid robots? Because there have been companies that have been working for the last 10 years on making these platforms, and we have not seen really one that you can see a full demo working that is, human-like, or that can do things like humans and not both like super slow or won't be able to go through obstacles. What's stopping? Is it hardware? Is it software? What's it?
And it's even longer it reaches back to the 80s that, Japanese incumbent players have been presenting robots, and it's been super fashionable among the big industrial companies in Japan to present such kind of prototypes to show their research power. And then it became quiet. And the last one, and a pretty good one already, was the Honda Asimo back in, I think, 2004 or so, I think was the last model presented. And then it became really quiet around humanoid robots. And also the whole robotics community actually, concluded in a way that it doesn't make so much sense to spend effort on trying to make robots walk on legs, just that they can, climb stairs or ladders or enter a car and then sit in the car. The benefits of having a robot that can do that seem to be limited versus all the stuff that you can counter and conquer with robots on wheels. So it was a common sense in the robotics industry and among service robot developers that robots on wheels make much more sense. They're more safe. They cannot fall over. They cannot fall down onto your children, for example, or at least less likely. And they're much cheaper to be built because just, for example, 2 wheels need to be controlled instead of like 10 more axes for these legs. And also just the control of everything is much simpler. So this is why it became really quiet up until the point that Tesla decided to go into humanoids. And I think that was a moment where everybody realized that robotics had progressed a lot. The engineering tools had progressed a lot, so it became much easier to develop such complex systems. A lot of research in robotics has taken place, and that AI is coming to the maturity. So answering your question, what is crucial is to apply this very generic deep learning-based AI technology that we now see in the generative AI context, to apply the same technology based on transformers and deep learning, which is, in the AI context, some argue that it's actually not true artificial intelligence, but that it's just a stochastic parrot, which is true. But still, the capabilities are amazing. Yeah, but
this is intelligence.
Exactly. So I became philosophic with some professors that I know already on discussions on LinkedIn and so on. But I think it's true. Yeah, it's probably, it cannot be explained as true artificial general intelligence, that has a consciousness and so on and so forth. So what we imagine to be there at some point, but it's a great step in capabilities based on neural network basic technology, so deep learning, and it came from this maximization of parameters and the transformer technology. And so, but long story short, to take that generic and universal technology that was now successfully used in chatbots, that was successfully used in image recognition and generation, to apply that to robot behavior. So kind of adapting this technology to physical hardware, to motion control ultimately, and to sensors, and make sense out of it.
Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you back soon.
It was my very pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
you.